Hey, welcome back to the Journeys of Not So Ordinary People podcast. I am one of your hosts. I'm Dr. Joe Hamlett, and I have my esteemed colleague here, Dr. Dave Peltz. What's up, Dave? How are you doing, man? I know we start off like this every week,
Every
but
week
yeah,
we do this. Everything is great, Joe. It's another blessed day to wake up and take a breath in the morning and wonder what we're going to do this time. So
right. So again, me too. I'm excited to be here. The weather's a little nicer today. It's 44 degrees versus a couple of days ago we had 7 degrees waking up. So it's like a heat wave right now for us. But again, thank you all for tuning in, either listening or watching the video. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about overthinking. And me and Dave were just referring to it, and we were talking about overthinking shit. So that's what we're going to talk about. Overthinking. And so I want to start with even this podcast that we're currently sitting here, me and Dave talking. This concept actually originated, Dave reminded me almost 2 years ago that we started talking about a podcast. But what happened, after we started talking about
what
the
happened
podcast?
to that gap?
Yeah. And it goes back to the title. We started overthinking shit. And that's what really happened. We started getting inside of our heads. And we started saying, well, to get a podcast going, we got to have the right equipment. We got to use the right platforms. We got to make sure we got topics. By the time we started making this list of things we needed to do, we didn't do it because we overwhelmed ourselves with thinking it had to be perfect, thinking it had to be right, thinking it had to, appeal to everybody. And so we just got inside of our heads so deeply that it just caused us to overwhelm ourselves, and we basically put it to the back burner. And unfortunately, that's just one example, of overthinking to the point to where you paralyze yourself, that you don't want to do anything. And like I say, that's just one example. Me and Dave have been friends since about mid 2016, and we've had a ton of ideas. We've had a lot of conversations, and we do exactly the same thing. And again, we overthink shit. We just get so deep into it that we feel like that if it doesn't come out perfect, if we don't get it just right, then we failed. And so this past October, we changed that tune. We said, you know what? We have been overthinking shit for the past 2 years at minimum, and we haven't gotten anywhere from it, so we made the decision we're going to do this podcast. And we did overthink it a little bit because we really wanted to, launch at the first of the year, not necessarily just to be like everybody else and say, hey, it's our New Year's resolution or we want to get this. No, but it was more a new beginning for us, being unapologetic. And that's really what it came down to was, stop overthinking it. Who cares what it looks like? So if you've seen the first episode, you've probably seen us already progress from day one to now. This is about our 6th episode. So we've already shown that, it wasn't as bad as we thought it was going to be, or and we don't have all the perfect equipment. We don't have all of the perfect, the platforms to do this on. But right now, if we would have waited for that, we'd be another 2 years. So our goal was to launch this podcast, stop overthinking shit, and just do it. And I think, again, this is a result of us allowing ourselves to, that's the other part of it. If we don't do it, learn from it, then we can improve it. So that's what this is all about. That's what today's show is about. It's just stop overthinking shit and just do it. So I know I had a little bit longer of an intro, but Dave, what are your thoughts on
You
this
know,
whole
Joe,
topic?
I have to thank you for when we met several years ago. You had already published a book or two, and I had at least one book stuck in my head, and for several years at that point. And you're like, well, why not write it? And I'm like, well, because I've got to do this, I've got to get my outline, I got to get my structure, and I have to get my everything has to be just right. And you're like, stop overthinking shit and just write it. And that's what I did. I wrote it, and was it perfect on my first draft? No. So I did have to do some editing, and I had a couple of people review it, and then finally we said, yeah, it's good enough. And I
Yep.
published it. And the other day I started writing my fifth book. And from 1 to 5, I'm already at number 5.
Right,
And
right.
again, over talking about overthinking shit, I was looking at my first book and I was like, oh my God, I can't believe I published this thing. There's spelling errors, there's grammatical errors, there's formatting issues. And I'm like, what was I thinking? Oh my gosh. And it's like, well, what I was thinking is I got to stop overthinking shit and just get it out
Yeah,
there.
yeah.
And the revision 2 is going to look much cleaner of that book.
Right. Yep.
So,
Yep.
that's in the back of my mind. So when I get done with 5, I get to go back and do a rev 2 of, my first and second book. And, it's just is what it is. And for those of us who tend to be overachievers or perfectionists, overthinking, or as it was referred to several years ago or many years ago, analysis or paralysis by analysis, you know, it's a true thing. We get stuck in thinking about things too much sometimes. And we really need to get back to, again, some of what we've mentioned in our previous podcast, perspective,
Yep.
and altering our perspective on what we're doing. And it doesn't have to be perfect. It
Right.
has to
Yep.
be good
Yep.
enough. And whatever good enough is to us, that's what's important. So maybe our 100% is everyone else's 150, or maybe our 70% is everyone else's 90%, or maybe our 80% is everyone else's 60%. We don't know. But to Joe's
Right.
point, we just got to start doing stuff
Yep.
sometimes.
Yep. And I think along that line of what you said when you reference somebody else's, 90% is yours, 70%. That's part of the problem right there, that we start to compare ourselves to
Comparing
other
ourselves to other
people.
people. Yeah,
Because again, I think we said it in the past. The only person you need to be comparing yourself to is yourself, and that version
absolutely.
of you yesterday, not even the future you, but
Yeah.
that's the only person that you should really even, it should even matter. Because
Mhm.
again, our perception of what we think is good meant to be, somebody else, it may be totally bad to them, but
Mhm.
that
Or
shouldn't
maybe
matter.
perfect, you know?
Exactly. So us, penalizing ourselves, or being very critical of ourselves is where we hurt ourselves the most. And so
Yeah.
back to what you said, that we analyze to the point where we paralyze ourselves, that we just
Overthinking
don't
shit.
want to move. Yeah, exactly. The simplest term is overthinking shit, and that's what it leads to when we don't have faith in ourselves or
Yeah.
trust in ourselves. And I'll just reflect on that a little bit more. Typically our gut tells us what we need to be doing. That,
Mhm.
and I've had this um conversation with myself many times. I actually posted a video a couple of years ago about that gut feeling. You run into a situation, and you've got, again, pros and cons. You're weighing all these things, and then what's going to be your deciding factor? And typically it's
Mhm.
going to be that gut feeling. Is it right or is it wrong? And when you start to trust that and believe that, your gut is telling you, or you feel it down in your bones, that this is either right or wrong, when you start, respecting that and relying on that, then all that noise goes out the window, as far as, comparing yourself to others, and things like that. So yeah, back to the reflection or perception piece. The only perception, the only, thing we should be concerned with when we think about this is ourselves. Like I say, we couldn't sit up here and be shirtless and things like that, and just feel like everybody's gonna be like, yeah, that's a cool show. For us, we may think it's cool, to be exposed, but other people may not be that
Yeah,
way. So we do have to have limitations, as far as being offensive and things like that. But
yeah.
again, still comes down to you do it for yourself.
Mhm.
And so again, try and drown out as much of that noise as you can. Because if you don't, you, like I say, me and Dave have experienced this over the years, just have these great ideas. And then we, shortly after our conversation, we talk ourselves out of it because we just get so ahead of ourselves that we
Or
feel like,
overwhelmed because
yeah,
we make
yeah,
those lists, and then those lists lead to other lists, which leads to
yep.
more detail, more
Yep.
detail.
And then you got 65 lists laying around, and you really don't have a starting point. So it
Yeah.
just goes back to the basics. And again, we've talked about this previously. Maybe you have this goal, that's way out there, but you got to have a starting point, and knocking off those little chunks of that. And I think
Mhm.
that's how you get that paralyze yourself, as you start looking too far down the road versus,
Mhm. Or
taking those
too
little
deep
baby steps,
into.
or going further than you need to.
Mhm.
At that point, again, at the starting point, you can't expect that you're going to have this, in our case, like this podcast, that immediately we drop our first episode, we got 2,000 subscribers. No, it's
Yeah.
not going to happen that way. And so, and I think we've discussed this too. As long as you're moving forward, taking a step each day, then that's progress. If
Mhm.
you've got further than you were yesterday, then that's progress. And again,
Yeah.
that again minimizes that overthinking shit, that that you're not getting things accomplished. And so that's part of it. Taking stock on those things that you have done, and that you've completed. It's gonna help you, give you that energy, give you that boost. Like me today, I'm just so excited, that we're recording this episode, and it's in a line of episodes that we've already created, and we're going to continue to create. So we'll just keep moving forward, and get out of our own heads.
Yeah, you mentioned something a few minutes ago, Joe, about comparing yourself to yourself instead of others. And you said comparing yourself to yesterday. And what I want to add there is I saw a post the other day, and it said, stop comparing yourself, and I'm paraphrasing, stop comparing yourself to the previous version of you. So as we mentioned before, we didn't have the necessarily the most beneficial upbringings, or we weren't born into the elitist upper class, and
Right. Yeah.
so
Yeah.
we did have some challenges, but we are much different today than we were a year ago, 5 years ago, 10, 20, 30. I'll stop there, 30 years ago.
Right.
so
Right.
but you have to really look at the most recent version of you, where you're at
Right.
today, and how you're
Yep.
progressing forward. To your point, as long as you're progressing, even if it's just a little bit, that's still a step forward. And that's really a discussion that Joe and I had about 5 months ago, when we're like, we just need to stop this. We need to stop
Yeah.
overthinking. We need to stop thinking. When was the last time someone said stop thinking, right? Stop thinking and start doing. So
Right.
we actually started doing. Of course, we didn't completely stop thinking, but we stopped overthinking shit, and we started
Yeah.
executing and doing the things that we needed to do to get there. And to Joe's point, we don't have top of the line equipment or top of the line, software or applications. We've gotten started for less, and I'll just throw a number out there, less than $100, and we're
Right.
up and
Yep.
going. But you need
Yep.
to do some research and figure out which platforms and which equipment's going to work best for you. I mean, if you're fortunate enough or want to go all out, top of the line, knock yourselves out. But the point is, you don't have to. And
Right.
just like when
Yep.
I wrote my first book, it wasn't, I didn't hire a photographer, and
Yep.
all
Yep.
that to do headshots and do professional pictures. I went out and did some of my own photos, and I did my own designs, and what templates were available, and just picked one that appealed to me, that was good enough, instead of, oh, that perfect cover template with a, you know what, there's no such thing as perfect. Well, there is, but it takes a long time to get there usually.
Right.
So
Right.
sometimes that good enough is enough. And in the business world, or in the corporate or work environment, workplace, I've always strived to provide that top-notch, perfect product. And sometimes I can do it within the time frame that's allotted to me, and sometimes I can't. And sometimes you can only do what you can do,
Right.
and your best, maybe 80% is good enough in this case.
Right.
And maybe that extra, 10 or 20% is going to cause you to go over schedule or go over budget. And that's something to think about. How much time do you want to allot to accomplishing this goal? It doesn't have to be the end goal, just this goal or
Right.
this piece of your plan. Like we talked about a couple of weeks ago, you have to have a plan. What does that plan look like? And what are those goals and sub goals and,
Yep. Yep.
inch stones and milestones that you can do to say, hey, we did it. And for Joe
Right.
and I, every week we check a box and say, wow, we did it again. We got another episode or 2 episodes done. We're getting them out there. So you have to figure out for yourself and in your own plan, when is enough good enough?
Well,
What does
well,
good enough look like sometimes, and stop
well,
overthinking things.
because again, you just kind of reflected on it, or you mentioned the fact that your 80% is good enough, but I think it still goes back to the fact that we're still trying to compare, you know,
Mm,
our progress or who we are to other people. I mean, and like I said, mentioned before, we shouldn't expect that our podcast is going to reach this level this early, but then you just mentioned about setting those small milestones and those goals. So at the end of this episode or the first episode, if we've got one more subscriber, that's one more than we had
it's one more
yesterday.
than we had yesterday.
And so that right there helps me not get too far or ahead of myself, looking around people that have been doing this for a period. That's the other part of it. Nobody sees anybody else's struggle. They see a lot of times that end result, or that they've gotten to this point, but they had these same struggles along the way. We just didn't see them. And
Right.
so, like I said, if me and you hadn't mentioned that we started working on this back in October 2 years ago, people might have thought, hey, well, they just launched this podcast, it was easy. And
Mhm.
that's not the case. So I think, again, just staying out of your head and thinking it's got to be the best, it's gonna blow up, and sit back and start counting your dollars and things like that. It does not happen that way. And us, me and you, going through our education journey, it didn't happen overnight.
No.
Again, for both of us, it was a period of time. And during that time, like I say, the in state people might now come to us both and say, hey, you guys are doctors. Wow. But yeah, there was a lot of struggles from start, from A to where we are today. And a lot of people don't see that. So
Mhm.
that's the part. Again, we look at successful people, we just see typically that end state, that they're there. We don't know the struggles they went through or how long
Yeah.
it took them to
Or the
get there.
challenges or the
Right,
level of
right,
effort or
exactly.
scope and
So
complexity.
that's why it's so important for you not to try and compare yourself to others. Now to
Yeah.
gain, some information, or to maybe get some, tidbits on how to get there, kind of like us trying to help you with your journey, so that you don't have to take that long scenic route. Same thing. It's, go do the research. Dave said it earlier, do the research. But again, don't overthink it. Don't overdo it. Don't think it's got to meet those standards. Get to a point where you're comfortable,
Yeah.
that you won't feel, even if you feel embarrassed, so what? Like I said, we're sat here with, shirtless. We may come back and say, man, that was a bad bad idea. But at the same time, if we both feel comfortable with that, you know okay. And that's what it really comes down to. When you
Yeah.
when you close your eyes at night, next day you say, hey man, that was good enough,
Yeah.
or it wasn't terrible.
Yeah.
Then you've taken another step forward. But if you,
Yeah.
you sit back and say, man, I shouldn't have did that, or I should, then again you readjust, and
Yeah.
come back, with a different light, with a different path. But that's why I said it earlier. If you don't at least put it out there, try it, throw it up against the wall, see if it sticks. And if it doesn't, then you try a different path the next day or the next time. And so
Yeah.
that's why, it's very important to not to overthink it
Yeah.
and just do it.
And you brought up a good point about doing research, and I'll make a correlation to the workplace as well. Um, when you're in college, sometimes depending on your degree program, there's a lot of research involved, and in terms of academia, there's a thing called qualitative inquiry. That's where you do a lot of research and you interview people. But the research piece itself, they suggest to go to the point of saturation. And what that means is you go to the point, you continue to research until you start seeing repeating patterns. And once you start seeing the common repeating patterns, okay, you've pretty much reached the end of the internet type thing. And you
Right.
can come up with a logical conclusion or understand the commonalities at that point. And the same for research in the workplace. It may be going to one or more peers or colleagues or
Right.
managers and say,
Yep.
hey, what are your thoughts on this, on how to do this particular project or report or analysis or presentation? And then you'll get those cues, like maybe it's a presentation and it's like, oh, have a good background, don't have too many words, stand up
Right.
straight, speak clearly. And once you hear that from enough people, you go, oh, maybe I should have a good background, not be too wordy, stand up straight, and speak clearly. And then that's your point of saturation. And
Right.
so in the workplace, to your point, people see the end products. They just see that report or that presentation or that project, that summary or that, paper or what have you, and say, oh, wow, this looks great. Get me 5 more. And then you're like, it took me a week to do that. It's like, well,
Right.
now you can go back and talk to your peers and say, how can I do this better or faster or
Right.
more
Yep.
efficient?
Yep.
So again, getting out of our head, stop overthinking shit, and figure out what's the best way to do things. And sometimes it does require thinking, but when you find yourself start to spinning your wheels, and you start, feels like you're getting nowhere, either step aside and reassess or take a third person perspective or get some help. Or to our point, just start doing something and then do those check-ins with your boss or your customer to say, hey, what do you think of this? My advice is always don't, get a job and then show the end product. Do some temperature checks along the way to make sure you're
Right.
on track,
Yep.
because there's nothing, well, there's a lot of things worse, but nothing worse than saying, here's my product. And they go, wow, that's here. And you should have been way over
Right.
here.
Yep.
Now
Yep.
you have to do all that rework. So if you
Yep.
do those checks, you can make those course corrections along the way. So you get to
Yep.
where you need to be. So you're not over here.
No, that's absolutely a good point, because again, we can think in our mind that we've done all those things we need to and we're ready to go. But you're absolutely correct. If we're doing something for somebody else or in a project or something like that, we actually do need to verify that we're on the right path. And so
Mhm.
that is absolutely a good point. Uh, in terms of you doing your own thing, that's different. But you're right, when it comes to an effort that is going to impact others, especially like you say in the case of you're having to put together a project or a presentation, it would make sense that you get those temperature checks and let people see your progress and make sure you're on the right path, because you're right, you're in a room full of people and you got this presentation you just spent a month working on, and you get in front of everybody and they're like, what is this, you know
We asked
or
for
you
a bridge and you're giving us a car?
right, the dead silence in the room, and you hear the did they get the memo. So you're
Mhm.
absolutely correct, in terms of if you're doing something that is going to affect or impact or is in relation to other stakeholders or other people
Yeah.
that are involved in it, they absolutely need to. And you can't just go say, yeah, I'm going to do it, it's just me, because that's not the way it works.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. There's always a lot. There's typically a lot of collaboration and
right.
and
Yeah.
peer and
Yeah.
supervisor involvement. Um,
Yep.
so let's kind of apply this to personal development. So we've talked about kind of like the professional and just do it side of things, and not overthinking shit. But what about from a personal side? So for me, from a personal perspective,
Right.
Again, I like to do DIY stuff, I like to make stuff and build stuff and fix stuff and play with stuff and, whatever. So, what I start realizing sometimes, like, when I'm doing a project is like, I'll get stuck and I'll be like, oh, I really don't feel like doing any more of this, because I don't want to mess it up. And it's like, sometimes you just got to get in there and try it,
Yeah.
and just, don't procrastinate. Maybe take a small piece of it. Don't paint the whole wall. Maybe just put a
Right. Yeah.
corner to see what the color is going to look
Yep.
like. And if you like
Exactly.
it, great. If not, then try another color. Or maybe you want to, tape off the baseboard. I'm talking about painting, so you don't
Right. Right.
spill on the baseboard, or get it on the floor. Maybe that works. Maybe decide to use a drop cloth or what, there's a bunch of different techniques out there that you can use. But sometimes you just got to try something. You don't necessarily have to go the whole distance and paint the whole wall and go, yeah, I don't like that color.
Right. Right. Right.
Sometimes you just do a couple spots, shade, light. Let's see what
Right.
it looks like in the shade and then the light. Yeah, I like this. Okay, now you can go for it. But then you haven't, at least you've progressed forward.
Right. Right. Yep. No, I agree 100%. And so, I've been doing some DIY stuff, bike stuff. That's like we talked about previously. Bike has become my passion. I've done a lot of different things. And so one thing that I've learned is, we talk about the research piece, and all that information is out there, which is great, but it could also be a detriment as well,
It can be
as we
overwhelming because there is
exactly
so much information out
so
there.
much information, so many different ways to do things, that it just, so again, it turns into that too much information, like you said before, and then you're in that paralyzed state again. Because
Yeah.
now you want look at one resource, they tell you this is the best approach, and you look at another and they tell you that's the totally wrong approach and you
Yeah.
should try this. And so it goes back to your point, doing really small portion of it, trying it out, because we talked about this before, even with our education journey, your path was totally different than mine.
Yeah.
And so it it goes back to what you're most comfortable with, what you're most willing to try and chance. That's still on you, because again, you can have all, like we've said before, we could have that same exact blueprint that either one of us took handed to you, as far as how to get here, and your journey, your road is still going to be different than
Mhm.
ours. And so that's the same approach I recommend that you take with anything you're trying. It's still going to be your interpretation, your perception of things, that's going to lead you to complete a project or complete whatever you're doing. So, like I say, it's great to have all this information and be able to do the research at the flip of a switch, or at a click of a mouse, or scrolling through your phone. But end of the day, it's how you apply all those things, and that goes back to that learning piece that we've talked about, the ability to take all that information and turn it into something that's going to be usable for you. Like I say, for the person sitting right next to you doing the exact same thing, their interpretation, their perception of things is going to be different than yours. So when you both start off, you may start off on the left foot and they may start off on the right foot, because that's most comfortable for them. So I just, the recommend that, like I say, take all that information, process it, that for what best works for you. Try, like Dave said, bits and pieces of it, or try a little bit. Don't paint the whole wall and then turn around and say, man, that sucks. But try that corner, try a little area, and then make that determination. And we
Mhm.
talked about it just briefly again. Grab somebody, your spouse or somebody close to you, and say, hey, what does that really look like to you? Well, get that outside perspective. And even if they come back and say, man, that looks ugly or that sucks, is that really how you feel about it? Because it still
Mhm.
comes down to you, being accepting of that and okay with it.
Yeah.
So,
So we're getting
um,
close on time. I'm just going to
yeah,
drop a couple of final thoughts. Probably one of the best things that Joe and I have learned over time is, you know, set your goals and set time frames for those goals. Like Joe had mentioned, we started thinking about this, back in October. We're at the end of February now. That gives you a little bit of a time frame, but our goal was mid-January. Did we hit that goal? No, but we're not far off from it because we're launching, and we've launched, and we've accumulated knowledge. We're very close to what our target goal was, but had we not set that goal, who's to say it wouldn't be another 6 months, because
Right.
we needed a goal to start executing against. And then once we established that goal, again, we reverse engineered what we needed to do to get to that point. It just took us a little bit longer. Holidays, COVID,
Right.
stuff like that kind of stepped in. So that's my final thoughts. Have some goals and time frames.
Well, thanks for that, Dave. Like I said, my final thoughts are, again, we got to just stop overthinking shit. Bottom line, because the more we overthink, the less action we're going to do. So I get it. Me and Dave have both been there, and we continue to do it on a day-to-day basis. And you just have to maybe pause, and really look at, like you said, set those goals, and not look so far down the road, but look at what you can do, right now and maybe tomorrow, but not think of a year from now, the expectation of this thing being big. Then you start to think back, well, if I want to get that big, I've got to do this, I've got to do that. And again, that just paralyzes us and makes us not want to do anything because we don't feel we're going to measure up to those things. So I'll end. Like Dave said, we're getting close to on time, and we don't want to continue to bore you or get you to tune away from us. So we just want to thank you for tuning into this episode. And with that, we want you to continue being your not so ordinary you. Until next time.